What's happening, everyone? Welcome back to another video. It's time for the next installment on my Mk5 GTI. Let's get it fired up. If you're following this project already, then you know that I've changed quite a bit of the hardware on this car. I've changed the turbo, I've changed the injectors, I've changed the map sensor, I've changed the fuel air pressure sensor, I've done a runner flap delete, carbon clean obviously, high pressure fuel pump, RS4 return valve, loads of stuff. We're now in a position where all the hardware doesn't match the software on the ECU. Now the interesting thing about this is that I could start this car up now, and I mean, yeah, the fuel pump would have to prime, but it would start, there's no doubt about it. There would, however, be a level of confusion, simply because the size and scaling of the injectors and the pressure sensors and all the rest of it have not been changed in the ECU, so there'd be a level of chaos, and we don't want chaos, we want a harmonious startup. So we're going to have to change the software to match the hardware. To get the software off the car is pretty simple. I plug in my auto tuner flash tool, identify the ECU type on the car, and that allows me to take a virtual read. A virtual read isn't actually a read from the ECU on the car, it's the auto tuner flash tool identifying what software version I've got and then downloading a fresh bone stock copy of it from their own server. And that's a good idea, because if you took the read directly from the car, then someone might have tampered with that before, and there might be loads of corruption on the file that you're fighting against whilst you're trying to tune it. It's best to just start with from factory fresh copy of the ECU file, and then that would be golden. Right, let's have a look at it. Right, I don't normally sit here in the middle of the workshop and do this, but I thought it would be pretty cool. I'm sat in Colin's chair, the comfortable one. Anyway, the whole point of this exercise is not to essentially map the car, it is just purely to get all the sensors, the injectors, everything scaled so that the ECU can understand everything, and when it does start up, it starts up good. It's as simple as that. I'm not going to go over absolutely everything, I'm just going to be pretty basic, give you a bit of an understanding, because I get asked this quite a lot. So to start off with, I need to open up the file, and for this I use Windows. It works well for me and I quite like it. I'll open up the file. Yeah, this is what you see when you open it up. This is all the reams and reams of data that the ECU's got inside it. Now, unless you're very, very experienced, then you'll not have a clue what any of that is. You could actually try and isolate some of that data, designate it as a map, give it some scales, factors, blah, 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 and boom, you've got a map. Imagine having to do that for every single bit of data. Absolute nightmare. Far easier if it's a really common bit of software like the Mk5 GTI that you can just download what's called a map pack. That map pack will overlay all the data straight on there, and then boom, there you go. Let's go through it then. Right, I have fitted a bigger turbo to this car. Therefore, the boost control maps within this ECU are completely null and void. They will not work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to completely reconfigure them so that when I start this car, I can control the boost even with a little knowledge about how this turbo is going to react. The ECU uses a closed loop control strategy to control the boost. I'm actually going to turn that off. I'm going to turn it into open loop just to make it easier for myself. I do that by finding the switch that on. That allows me to use one table to control boost. I don't want to use one, I actually want to use 5. So I'm going to patch a 5 map boost profile switch onto this file, and then that'll be that done. Right, so nice and simple. I've now got a custom 5 map boost profile with number 1 set at 5% duty cycle, map 2 set for 20% duty cycle, map 3 set for 40. It normally takes about 40% duty cycle to get a KO4 type of turbo going, so 40 should be about right as a low boost setting. Remember, this is just really rudimentary just to get the turbo going. I'll log it and then we'll adjust these. I've got one set at 60. Now the reason I set that number 1 map to 5% duty cycle is pretty simple. That's essentially a wastegate only pull. That's the boost setting that I'll be using initially. I don't know how this turbo is going to react. It might spike to the moon if I put a bit of duty cycle in. So I put essentially nothing in just to see how it reacts, make sure the wastegate's operating, and then we'll tune from there. The reason I put 5 in is pretty simple. It's like an arbitrary value. If I put 0 in there, then I might get confused with other strategies in the ECU. For example, if the ECU wants to go into limp mode, if the N75 is disconnected, then the ECU will automatically want to put 0% in there. I log that 0, and I think I've done it when actually the ECU might have done it. So I put 5 in there so I can log that 5, and I can know that that 5 is something I put in there. It's just like, you know, checking your work kind of thing. But anyway, that's the boost control strategy. Really simple version of it. Sorted, 5 map boost profile, varied duty cycle, so I can test this turbo, log, adjust, and then we'll go from there. Chair's a bit squeaky, isn't it? Right, next one, fueling. So I fitted bigger injectors. I fit the KO4 injectors. KO4 injectors are about 15% bigger than KO3 injectors. What does that mean? So for every millisecond of injector on time, the KO4 injectors will typically fire 15% more fuel than the KO3. So I'll be 15% over fueling. It's not exactly 15% to be fair, but it's, you know, ish. So because I've actually fitted the bigger injectors, I now need to tell the ECU to say, yeah, pull about 15% off and you'll be about fine. So this is the table here for the injector size. It's a global thing, so it's across the whole map. And what we need to do here is scale this down about 15%. Now, I mean, if we had that value there and we went that minus 15% is 0.0295, blah, 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 blah. Now here's an interesting thing. These injectors were pulled out of an Audi S3, so the engines are so similar that why don't we go and have a look, see what it is in an Audi S3. Audi S3, 0.03. I calculated 15% as 0.0295, and an Audi S3 is 0.03. So to be fair, I'll happily take the Audi S3s because it's so simple. So if I change my Golf one to 0.03, boom, them injectors are now scaled. Now that isn't fine tuning, that is just ballpark. So there's possibly going to be a little bit of fine tuning of that, plus lots of other maps pertaining to fuel injection. That's just literally the global size of the injector. So now when I start it up, my fuel trim should be pretty small. And that's the fuel injectors done. Right, what should we move on to now? Let's have a look at the high pressure fuel rail sensor. I've changed that from the 140 bar one that comes on the Mk5 to the 200 bar one that comes on the Audi S3. A few different reasons for doing that, so let's go through that first. First of all, I'm going to be tuning this, so I'm going to be raising the fuel pressure up. I want a pressure sensor that will be able to display that okay. Now the original one will manage it no problem. I'll probably be targeting something like 130, 135 bar of pressure. This is only 140 bar pressure sensor, so I'll be right at the end of that. So it makes sense to get a sensor that will be able to see that a bit better. But also, I want to be able to see fault pressure. Fault pressure is pretty important. I don't want the pressure to get too high and for me to not be able to see it. It'll be a bit silly that. So I need a pressure sensor with a bigger scaling so I can see that. The 200 bar one off the Audi S3 works perfectly fine. So let's have a look at how we're going to change that. This is the scaling inside the ECU for that. So you've got voltage along the top, 0 to 5 volt. The ECU only gets a 0 to 5 volt signal, and for that you'll see that at 0 volts then it's 0 pressure. At 5 volts there's 140 bar pressure. I know it says 14, but it is 5. There you go. So you can see that that's actually 140 bar. And there's a scaling off the Audi S3. So this one works from, again, 0 pressure right up to 20. Well, it's not 20, it's 200 bar. Let's get rid of that. That's actually 200 bar sensor. So all we need to do is transfer this data in to this part here. So as simple as that, really. All we're doing is telling the ECU, look, don't use the 140 bar scaling, use the 200 bar one. And that'll mean that, for example, if the ECU gets 2.5 volts back from the sensor, it knows that it's 100 bar, it's not 70 bar. Does that make sense? The map sensor on the Mk5 GTI is a 2500 millibar map sensor, manifold absolute pressure sensor. It's an absolute sensor, so it sees all pressure, absolutely all of it. And because of that, it's actually quite restrictive. Atmosphere, as we know it in the UK, is about 1 bar. So it sees that 1 bar, which means that it can only then see another 1.5 bar of positive pressure boost, as we call it. I can tell you now that I'm going to be running more than 1.5 bar. This is going to be taken to stage 2 plus kind of levels. That kind of boost, we're asking, 1.8, possibly 1.9 bar. They really are pushing it. The problem with using the stock map sensor is that even though we would run 1.8 bar, the map sensor couldn't actually see past 1.5 bar. I'll actually give you a good example now. This is a log of a pull here, and you can see the RPM going up there nicely. You can see the pressure, that is the boost that's seen by the pressure sensor, rises, of course, and then flat lines across. Now, if you're tuning this car on the road and all you had was the stock pressure sensor, then you might think that, yeah, we're running 1.5 bar of boost there, it's pretty cool. Well, actually, you probably is not. The reality is that you might actually be doing this. The thing is that you just don't know. The reason you don't know is because the pressure sensor can't see it. So it's important to have a pressure sensor that is scaled so that you can see it. Taking out the 2.5 bar one from the car and fitting the 3 bar one means that I can see atmosphere, 1 bar, plus 2 bar on top of that. So I can actually run 2 bar and see it on the logs, which is pretty cool. And that's exactly what I want. Now let's not make this any more technical than it needs to be. The top and bottom of it is that this is the pressure sensor scaling in the Mk5 GTI, and this is the pressure sensor scaling in the Audi S3. So I just take this, I copy it, and I go boom. And I take this, I copy it, and I go boom. Simple as that. Take the S3's pressure sensor scaling, put it in the Mk5 file, and that's it. Right, what will I do now? Runner flaps. That's it. I've done a runner flap delete on this car. I explained that in the video, so I hope that made sense to you. There's a whole strategy inside the ECU for that. We'll just find that. It's this section here. All these tables here are based on the runner flap movement, so we'll just have a look at here. If I want to tell the ECU to just not try and move the flaps, I'll just set everything to 0. Simple as that. Come out with there. That's that bit done. Do it a few more times and we'll have this. All these tables here where there used to be 1s, there's now 0s. So this whole section now, which controls the runner flaps, has been completely removed from the ECU. Everywhere where there was a 1, there's now a 0. So the ECU will not try to move the flaps. There's a few different settings for temperature and code words and all the rest of it to delete as well. But the whole point is that there's a strategy in the ECU for the flaps, and I've just removed it. Now, if anyone's had the runner flap delete before, then you know that it can cause some running problems, squeaky chairs and all that. And that is because of a routine in the ECU, which is for heating of the catalyst, the catalytic converter, if you have one. It requires to be hot for it to work efficiently. And when you first start the car, it's not hot. So there's a routine in the ECU to get the cat hot. The ECU uses different fueling, but it also uses the runner flaps to control the airflow to enable this cat heating. And basically, when you delete the flaps, then the ECU can't use the flaps to control it. So it kicks up a fuss and your car runs like a bag of shit when you first start it up. Pretty simple. All you need to do is, delete the cat heating routine. Simple as that. In this software it's pretty easy, but on some other versions of software, like on Audi S3s and stuff, you can't actually turn it off, so you have to actually minimize the cat heating time. But it's all much of a muchness. The whole point is to just stop that routine happening, and then when you do start the car up, it will literally start up like factory. Loads of talk on the forums about how that's some in-depth and it never runs right. It does, you just got to turn it off, you know. Is that what we're doing, I think? I mean, that's pretty much it, really. I just wanted to give a bit of a creaky chair oversight on the changes that need to be made to the software so that it matches the hardware that I put on. If I started that car up, I can guarantee that the car would start. But that chaos, that level of control that's just not there. I mean, the idle might hunt all over. The fuel injectors would be putting in too much fuel. If I then try to drive it on the really wild stock boost control tables, I'd be boosting to the moon and possibly causing problems. So it's really important to get everything under control before I start it, and then we can unleash all hell, you know, on the big spinny thing afterwards. But now that I've got all that done, I now need to export that file. I'll then flash it onto the car using the auto tuner, and then we'll go out for a drive, and I'll make sure that this is exactly how I want it to be. And while we're doing that, I'll tell you about, there's a few other things I've changed in the ECU that I haven't really shown. You know, I need to modify a few different things like limits, torque limits, load request limits, all a manner of things just to make sure that this car can be tuned. I'm not really covering that because this isn't the how-to, it's more just a bit of an insight into see exactly what needs to be changed, but there is lots more changed on this file before it goes onto the car. a few more minutes and it'll be done. Right, time to get the car fired up now, and because this is obviously a fresh turbo build, I don't want to like chuck loads of pressure through that turbo without getting the oil in there, so I'll turn it over with the coils disconnected, and that'll enable the fuel pressure to build up a little bit as well. So let's just turn it over. Right, sweet, that'll do. Nice one. Plug all the coil packs in. Fuel pressure. Well, yeah. Sweet. Moment of truth. Let's fire it up. Bosh. Right, let's get the laptop on. Sounds as friggin' epic as normal there. If we look at the first thing, we'll look at fault codes. I have a fault code there: intake manifold, tuning valve, position sensor. That is purely a runner flap delete code. I'll have to go in and delete that code afterwards. Not really worried about that at the minute. Let's have a look at what everything else is doing. As you can see that my fuel trims are really small. If I hadn't scaled them injectors, then that would be a much bigger value. There's no doubt about it. Also, my rail pressure. Now, if I hadn't scaled the pressure sensor, then of course, then that might be wrong. It might be reading something like 30 bar, which is completely false. So it's important I get that scaling right. And then obviously the map sensor scaling, can't check that at idle, but we'll see that when I go and do a log, which is probably what I'll do now. I'll probably do like a nice big long 4th gear pull, and we'll get some data, and we'll be able to show you stuff. Right. Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Oh yeah, that is very cool, very cool. Before I do a log, let's make sure that I can select the boost setting that I want to. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back to 1. 1's the low duty cycle map that I set for 5%. I don't know if you can see this because it's pitch black, but I'm going to do a log now. Let's go and do it. Right, I've got a logging on. Get into 4th gear. Full throttle. There's a pull. Woo! That'll do. That seemed a bit spicy, that, to be fair. We're only doing about 10 psi gear pressure. Obviously we'll have a look at the log when I get back. But yeah, oh, felt good though. Right, let's go back and review this log. Into the unit. Right, let's have a look at this log then. We'll see how close we were. For example, 5% duty cycle, that's what I set in the table. And you can see here, flatlined. It actually says 4.3, but that's 5%. That's just like a little anomaly in the ECU. Not worried about that. That's basically the 5% that I set it at. And for that, I set the wastegate pressure to 10 psi, and you can actually see it achieves that about there, about 0.6 bar. It comes up nice and quick to 0.6. That should be a straight line, straight through there. Don't know why that's creeping. It might be a little stiff, which I can sort out. That's not a problem. Fuel pressure, 130 bar. That's exactly what I want. You can see that I achieve 130 bar across the pole there. Ignition timing, obviously nice and fine. Yeah, I mean, that's friggin' it. The log looks pretty good. The boost's not exactly how I want it to be, but I can work on that. But it just goes to show that I've set the wastegate duty cycle that I want, and then I've done it all safely, so all the sensors are reading exactly what they should, and the boost's fine. So let's call that a day for this video. I'm pretty happy with that. Car's running, it's mint. I know it's dark, but I couldn't see any smoke. There was no leaks before I went out. The car got up to temperature fine, thermostat's working perfect. So I mean, the next step really is, the wheels were a little wonky because, you know, I've had the suspension off and all the rest of it. But now I know that it's completely safe. I'll get the wheels aligned and we'll go from there. Pretty friggin' epic. Thanks very much for watching this video. Hope it's been a little bit interesting for you. If you liked it, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.